Welcome to the latest video on the history of Dark Ages England. Episode 20, The Vikings Just Keep Coming. Early in 1010 the Vikings were reinforced, probably by the strongest army yet from Denmark. They gathered in East Anglia and took Ipswich, and then headed straight for where they heard the English army was stationed. It was led by Ulfkel Snilling, who had managed to gather a larger army than before, which, considering the invaders were also larger in number, is perhaps just as well. They met near Thetford at Reetham Heath. The East Anglians were the first to flee the field, but the men of Cambridge held their ground until overcome by sheer numbers, and the day was lost. This left the way open for the advancement into untrod encounters devastating all before, and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle lists about 15 counties that misfortunes befell, and then laments that when the raiders were in the east, the defending army were kept in the west, and the word to highlight is kept. There seems to have been rumours that not everyone was fighting on the same side, and that bribes were going to certain people. But what seems odd, with hindsight, is that the chronicler complains that the Danegeld was not paid soon enough. Why they should think this way is beyond us. So the prevailing thought seems to have foolishly been that paying the Danegeld was the right decision. 1011 saw a whopping £48,000 promised to be paid to the Danes. But so much money had already been drained from the economy that it was not raised until the end of the following year, 1012. The previous year, the Vikings had besieged Canterbury, and it was betrayed from within by a chap called Aethelraed, who had been rescued from the Vikings some years earlier by Archbishop Alfege. They captured and seized Archbishop Alfege and dragged him to Greenwich and demanded a ransom for him. This he refused to have anything to do with and told his fellow men not to pay. He was brutally tortured in front of the army, with continuing pelting of bones, cattle heads and the like, but he refused to bow to their wishes. Eventually, one Viking, with more mercy than the others, felled him with the butt of his axe. Thorkel the Tall, who was the supposed leader, was unable to stop the brutality. This was a mob getting out of control, even of its own commanders, and one suspects that this was the reason that the said Thorkel later in the year threw his lot in with Aethelraed, having first disbanded the army. The defection of Thorkel the Tall gave Swein Forkbeard enough reason to personally lead the battle in England to try and take the throne. Swein may have reasoned that Thorkel, being on the ground and a competent leader, may have been eyeing the English throne for himself. So Swein made his move while the mood of the people was in general against King Aethelraed, and the peasants in general against the ruling class by whom they felt betrayed. He was in with a good chance of the throne for himself. England had come into being more by accident, certainly not by any grand design. Aethelraed the Unready had been crowned King of Wessex and Mercia, but regarded Northumbria as part of his overlordship. But Northumbria, which had the Danelaw, did not always feel part of Wessex and Mercia. The latter, in turn, had always held the belief that it was its own realm, merely aligned with Wessex. Devon and Cornwall only looked to Wessex when they were threatened from without the island and looked to it for protection, but for the most part felt separate, and all indications are that the majority still spoke a Cornish Celtic language. In August 1013, Swein landed near Gainsborough, having travelled up the Humber and into the River Trent, then promptly had the Danelaw in support of him. The old kingdoms of Lindsey and Northumbria and the Confederation of the Five Boroughs gave their full support, his army being supplied with horses and provisions. Swein left his son Canute in command at Gainsborough and immediately made his way across land into Mercia, where the army were allowed to pillage as they wished. The Mercians soon surrendered, and Swein made his way down the centre of the country to Oxford, which immediately threw open its gates, and on to Winchester, the capital of Wessex. From there they went to London, but it held out, so he retreated back to Bath, where the western thanes all threw in their support, before he made his way back to Gainsborough. Aethelraed had sent his queen Emma to the safety of her brother Duke Richard II in Normandy, and by Christmas Aethelraed joined her in exile. Swein was effectively king and certainly military commander of England, but on 3rd of February 1014 the whole scene changed with the sudden death of Swein. The army in Gainsborough immediately threw in their support for Canute, the younger of Swein's two sons. The English nobles outside the immediate Lindsey sent a delegation to France asking Aethelraed to return and be king once more. An obvious case of better the devil you know than the devil you don't, but the offer came with strings attached, namely that he ruled more fairly than he had before. This probably meant more consistently. As it can be seen, it was his inconsistent style of operation that lost him the kingdom in the first place. Although actual competence and less corruption will have been associate concerns. He was accepted on the terms laid down by the nobles and churls, and is the first example of an English monarch agreeing to be accountable to those under them. Not that it set a trend, as he was hardly respected, even in death. But Aethelraed, showing the resolve the same as when he invaded Cumbria some years earlier, went into Lindsey before Canute could mobilise any defence. So Canute retreated, leaving the men of Lindsey to their fate. Aethelraed showed ruthlessness and had any military slaughtered. However, this comes across as all show and no substance. Harold, Sweyn's eldest son, became King of Denmark, and Canute raised a new invading army in Denmark, bringing with him Eirik Hlathreir as military advisor. Eirik it was who had helped to overthrow Olaf Tryggvason in Norway and was now governor of Norway. Thorkel the Tall was back on the side of the Vikings, having been betrayed by Aethelraed. With Aethelraed II, or unready, now back as King of England and seemingly ready to govern as the people would like, a problem arises in the form of his eldest surviving son, Edmund. This happens just as Canute lands back in England in the summer of 1015, and there was a double murder of two leading thanes, Cyfirth and Morcar, from the Danelaw. What prompted this we know not, but there was much resentment within the Danelaw about their deaths, and Edmund seized his opportunity. The story is this: Aethelraed had put suspicion of being directly involved with the murders on himself by ordering the arrest of Edith or Eilgift, the widow of Cyfirth. Edmund gallantly came to her rescue and then took her back to her lands within the Danelaw, and before gallantly taking possession of the lands belonging to her dead husband, as both Aethelraed and Canute were not in the good books with the people of the Danelaw, Edmund II, known as Ironside, now gallantly married the Danelaw Edith and was declared king. Effectively, civil war was imminent, with Aethelraed the Unready, plus the added spectator bonus of what was essentially an outside invading army under Canute, rampaging and pillaging up from the south around Poole Harbour, while the two incumbent armies started to eye each other with readiness to do battle. The North had declared for Edmund, just as previously they had shouted their hurrahs for Swein and Canute, and although it was by force that Canute was taking the south, it is clear that what they all wanted was strong governance and good laws. Now into play comes the Mercian leader Eadric, an opportunist who had been mixed up with the two murders, but had changed side to Edmund just at the time he had heard about Aethelraed being taken ill, so was raising an army ostensibly to fight Aethelraed alongside Edmund. But when the two met up, he split from Edmund and went over to Canute. This all seems politicking on his part, as if he is weighing up on which side has the winning formula. His departing from Edmund may have had to do with the lack of size of the Northumbrian forces, Edmund not being able to raise as many as he should have wished, being then half-hearted about the whole affair. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle notes, the army went home for Epiphany and only returned on the threat of being fined under the terms of the Witan. Next episode, the Civil War and its aftermath. If you found this video greatly, please give a click-a-rooney thumbs up, also push the subscribe button and ring that bell to get notification of new releases. They are out on Mondays with occasional bonus episodes on a Thursday, and any comments on social media would be much appreciated. Thank you.